welcome you to our second community meeting for families of identified TAG students, Tigard-Tualatin School District. We have a great topic for you tonight. Tonight will be a bit of a shortened session. Instead of giving time to our Q&A at the end, we are going to ask that you email your questions to us. You can also type them into the Q&A and we will save that and follow up at a later time. So tonight will be more about presenting information to you that we hope will be valuable as you raise your talented and gifted students at home. And yeah, we welcome your questions at another time. So you will get quite a bit of information tonight, but just a reminder that this is recorded and we do always upload the recordings of these community nights on our district TAG website. So you can access those at your convenience. Okay, we can go ahead and move forward with the slide. So at this session, our goal is to introduce you, or if you already know about this topic, dive deeper into the topic of overexcitabilities, which is another way to describe talented and gifted children's intense responses to external and internal stimuli. So we'll go into greater detail about what those overexcitabilities are, and then more importantly and useful to you, how to implement productive strategies to support your children's overexcitabilities at home and in school. Next slide. So before we introduce you to those overexcitabilities, I want to just briefly review on this slide some of those characteristics that make our talented and gifted children unique among their peers. So one, we know that the experiences and abilities of gifted children are different from more typically developing children. So the overexcitabilities we'll talk about tonight is one of those ways that they are different and their needs differ. So one way is that they may have more differences than similarities between themselves and other actual gifted children. So instead of just seeing the gifted population as different from typically developing children, we also need to understand that among the gifted population, there are great differences. Their intellectual, physical, social, and emotional qualities develop in vastly different and asynchronous ranges, so making the diversity of this population even more pronounced. They're often misunderstood or not understood at all, or as we've seen in our district, not identified as talented and gifted until maybe later in their schooling, or sometimes not ever. That's an issue we've talked about in other evening sessions that we're trying to correct. And that's often due to what we'll talk about tonight, their overexcitabilities and complex thought processes. Many times their ideas are often not heard in class or in their families, in their home environments, in their social environments, or reciprocated or returned or mimicked or seen by others. This inability to interact and converse at their level causes sometimes boredom, frustration, and that can lead to stress. Next slide. So our topic of overexcitabilities tonight is one way to dive a little bit deeper into those subtle differences between students who are talented and gifted and those from the general population. Go ahead and click forward. So more specifically, overexcitabilities are, as I mentioned just briefly, they refer to our talented and gifted students' innate tendency to respond in an intensified way to both external stimuli and internal emotional stimuli, and external being things like social interactions or even sound, taste, and we'll talk more specifically about those tonight. You'll often notice these very early in life. Students with overexcitabilities require less stimulation to produce stronger and more lasting responses. Life is experienced in a manner that is deeper, maybe more vivid, more acutely sensed. Children with overexcitabilities are more intense or sensitive, perceptive, persistent, energetic compared to peers. So notice those are qualities that we generally see as very positive, though overexcitabilities can sometimes be seen in academic settings or even in the home environment or in places like a restaurant or at a graduation ceremony as problematic. And so tonight we really want to emphasize the full range of how to view overexcitabilities in children and really celebrate them as opposed to seeing them as obstacles or problems that need to be solved. The stronger overexcitabilities are, the stronger that they are, the less peers and teachers tend to welcome them. They are often mistaken as indicators of potential pathology. So again, problematic behaviors that need solutions, rather than as what we want to introduce them as, signs of strong developmental potential as our students, as their assets, as assets that we can develop and sharpen and help students leverage. It can be seen as something to be treated, an overexcitability, rather than as a contributor to their optimal development. So our intention in focusing on this topic tonight is to help parents understand these behaviors and characteristics in their children as positive contributors to their optimal development. So not only will we talk about what those overexcitabilities are and how they look and how they may be exhibited by your children, but we want to equip you with strategies and tools for nurturing that optimal development. Okay, next slide. Here's just a quick overview of what the 5 major overexcitabilities are. We'll dive into each one of these more closely tonight. First, we have psychomotor, and that would be a great capacity for being active and energetic. Sensual, which refers to an enhanced sensual experience, sensitivity in those 5 senses: seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, hearing. Intellectual, a thirst for knowledge, discovery, questioning. Imaginational, vivid imagery, richness of dreams, fantasies and inventions, a preference for the unusual. And emotional, feelings and emotions that are intensified. So tonight we do have with us presenting several of our TAG specialists at various schools in the district. Again, I'm Shavetta Miller, and I support talented and gifted students and their families and teachers at the secondary level. We will be sharing all of our contact information again at the end, as we do at every meeting. And if you joined us after the very top of the hour, just a reminder that we will be following up with your questions after tonight. So you can definitely put them in the Q&A and we will save those and follow up shortly. And you can also always email us with those questions if you want to take more time to develop them. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to one of my TAG colleagues and we'll start diving deeper into the first overexcitability.
Thanks, Shveta. Next slide, please. Good evening, I'm Karen Hugart, and I'm the TAG specialist at Metzger and CFT. I'm going to go into a bit more detail about 2 of the overexcitabilities Shveta just introduced you to. The first is the psychomotor overexcitability. This one is a very common one that I see characteristics of in a lot of the gifted students I work with. As you can see at the top of this slide, these are the kids we often need to say, "Why can't you just sit still?" to. These kids have high energy levels. They are busy and restless. Sometimes they have a lot of inner tension, so their movement is an outward expression of that. They often are students who talk very rapidly And sometimes they use their hands and arms or body to express themselves. Physical movement and activity is just necessary for these kids to get through the day. Next slide, please. Some recommendations for working with kids who display characteristics of the psychomotor overexcitability are mostly related to physical movement. These kids need opportunities to move throughout the day. Encourage them to participate in physical activities like team sports, individual sports, martial arts, dance. We can teach these kids that go back one slide, thanks. Melissa just mentioned to go back one slide, please. Thanks, yeah. We can teach these kids that a timeout can actually be a choice of theirs and not a punishment. Maybe they can ask for movement or stretch breaks when they start to recognize that need in themselves. We need to encourage periods of rest and relaxation for these students. They often don't seek those kinds of things out on their own. Parents and teachers need to be mindful to avoid activities for these kids that require sitting for too long, and also to plan for movement activities when they are required and it's not an option, they need to sit for long periods of time. Instead of hearing, "Why can't you just sit still all day?" These kids need to hear, "You have wonderful enthusiasm and energy." Next slide, please. Thanks. The next one I'm going to talk about is the sensual overexcitability. These kids usually have very heightened senses. Throughout the day, these kids may hear, "What's the big deal?" They may find the tiniest detail or sound or touch so incredibly annoying, while the rest of us just don't understand why it's a problem. I like to give the example of kids who can't stand the feel of a certain tag on the back of their shirt or the seam on their sock, and they throw fits about wearing that shirt or those socks. Noises, smells, lights, tastes, all can be an issue for these kids. They may become irritable and frustrated from sensory overload. On the flip side, these kids may have a very enhanced aesthetic appreciation. They may notice lots of small details that none of the rest of us do. Some of these kids can see what others only imagine. Their mind may be a much more real place than ours. They can have deep emotional connections or aversions to smells. Lots of them are picky eaters. Some of these kids choose sensory pleasures to comfort themselves. They may have strong attachments or longer attachments to stuffed animals, blankets, or loved items. Next slide, please. Some recommendations for working with kids who display characteristics of sensual overexcitability are, we as parents and teachers can help them develop self-efficacy and coping skills. If they know what bothers them or what sets them off, we can teach them what they can do when they start to feel that way. We can discuss positive aspects and strengths that they have because of this sensitivity. We can create comforting environments for them and allow them space to get away from their triggers. These kids usually need time to stop and smell the flowers, to appreciate the things around them. We can give the kids control over creating their own spaces. Ask them what works for them. And pick your battles. If clothing is an issue, allow them to wear comfortable but appropriate clothing. These kids need to hear more of us saying, "I think you know what you like and what feels good to you." Next slide, please, and I'm going to pass it over to Melissa.
All right, thank you, Karen. My name's Melissa Jaskowiak, and I'm the tag specialist over at Byram and Alberta Writer, and I'll be sharing more information on the last three overexcitabilities. So the next one I would like to talk about is the intellectual overexcitability. A child with this overexcitability has a high capacity for intellectual endeavors and tends to be more easily recognizable as gifted just due to the nature of this overexcitability. Again, even with the intellectual OE, the more pronounced an overexcitability is within the child, the less likely it is to be welcomed. So negative feedback the student might hear is, "We don't have time for that," or oh, I don't know. Can you just not right now? I can't even process all of that. They're the ones who have an insatiable curiosity with wide and deep interests. They often ask a ton of questions or just share a lot of facts that they know. And sometimes they know just about everything about a specific topic. Or sometimes they have a very wide range of knowledge about multiple topics, kind of like a walking encyclopedia, based on whatever their interests are. They have a high ability to sustain intellectual effort and stimulation. They are very persistent in problem solving and will often just stick with it until they figure it out. They might be the ones who just sit there and will keep working at it till they get it. They oftentimes are good multitaskers. And you might think they're not listening when they interrupt with something that's completely off topic. But then when you ask them about what you said or what they were supposed to be doing, they can just answer it perfectly and have all the answers. And it can be really frustrating sometimes as the person being interrupted. And they also can have some perfectionistic tendencies with that intellectual overexcitability. So next slide, please. And then needs specific to this overexcitability would be to provide rich and varied intellectual challenges that allow for deep thought and exploration of those topics that they're interested in, help foster their curiosity, guide them in finding answers to their own questions, or respond to some of their questions with some of your own probing or philosophical questions. If they're the type who just asks questions nonstop and you're constantly berated by questions, you can ration their questions so that they, can only ask a small number of questions. And in that, they have to be more thoughtful. That way they have to be more thoughtful and concise with the questions that they do decide to ask. Focus and respond to the process they went through during a project or a performance, as opposed to solely focusing on the final outcome or the grade. And doing that can help alleviate some of the pressure and stress that they feel related to perfectionism. Provide them with opportunities to interact with like-minded peers. And then some encouraging words that they should hear might be something along the lines of, you have a great potential to learn new things and make changes, or you have the ability to solve the problems that can really make our world a better place and really help people. All right, next slide, please. All right, the next one is the imaginational overexcitability. These kids are the outside the box thinkers who have an almost childlike whimsy that they carry with them throughout their life. They might hear things like, you're too old for that, grow up, it's not real, or be practical. They are very creative and imaginative. They're also not bound by the rules of reality, which allows them to come up with a lot of these creative solutions to problems. They might create imaginary worlds to explore and will often have imaginary friends. Some aspects of their imagination may seem very real to them. These are the kids whose imaginations can sometimes run wild and then really overwhelm them or get them into some trouble. So sometimes the overexcitabilities can overlap. So for instance, if you have a child with both the imaginational and intellectual overexcitability, they might have spent a lot of time just thinking of current events, researching the coronavirus, and then finding out everything that they could about it. But then some of that information could be overwhelming and even scary, especially if they have that imaginational overexcitability and they imagine all the possible outcomes or scenarios, and then they have a tough time distinguishing what is real versus what they have created in their head. And that's where this overexcitability in particular can start to get really tricky. All right, next slide, please. Needs specific to this overexcitability. As with all overexcitabilities, it's beneficial to talk about the positive aspects of it. If you are a creative outside the box thinker, then you can often imagine some of the best solutions and possible outcomes there can be. Remind them that they have control over the world that they're making in their head, and they can change it to be less scary or more positive. Like, think about how you would calm someone who's had a nightmare. And as Shweta mentioned earlier, it's very possible that these are the kids who do tend to have very vivid dreams. Their mind and behaviors are tools that they have control over, and they should be working in their favor. Provide them with opportunities to foster their creativity, maybe by using writing, drawing, painting, dancing, singing as creative outlets. And then offer open-ended activities or questions to really engage them in that creative and imaginative problem-solving process. And then they would probably love to hear things like, you think up and tell the best stories, or you can see and interpret the world in ways others can't or just won't. And that's a very special gift. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and then lastly, we have the emotional overexcitability. And you know, if you have an emotionally overexcitable child, the emotions can seem like an explosive roller coaster ride. And they may hear things like, you need to calm down. And I think most of us have had an experience and realized that it's not always the best thing to say to someone who's experiencing big emotions in the moment. Calm down is not generally something they're capable of in that moment. They tend to have intense feelings that are manifested in extreme and complex ways. Feelings may accumulate from various fears and anxieties that they have. They may experience a wide range of conflicting emotions simultaneously. The question, how are you feeling, can be tricky to them sometimes because they just feel everything. Interpersonal relationships are extremely important to these children. They have the ability to both absorb and respond to the feelings of others. They're very empathetic, but that also means that there's if there's very negative feelings surrounding them, it can have a negative impact and affect them as well. And they often feel compelled to act on their empathy and concern for others. They tend to be some of the most caring individuals you'll ever meet. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and then needs specific to this overexcitability would be to be sure to actively listen to their concerns and when they share their feelings. Help them identify their feelings and develop an emotional vocabulary so that they can let people know what is happening to them and inside of them. They can also be hyper aware of the impact their feelings are then having on others. So it is very important that they have the tools to be able to pull themselves out of a spiraling emotional situation where they feel one way and they notice others feeling another way, and then it just keeps swirling. Teach them to anticipate those physical and emotional responses that they lean into, and to practice response strategies like relaxation techniques or counting to 5, just to stay focused and not get too caught up in everything. And then as a parent, share your own feelings in positive and productive ways, and provide opportunities for empathy and social concern that you can do as a family. And then with that, I will turn it over to Carrie.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Melissa. So I'm Carrie Cordes, and I'm the elementary TAG specialist at Durham and Tualatin Elementary Schools. So as we mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, tonight is a little bit shorter, kind of short and sweet as far as how much information we are sharing with you. We kind of just touched on this topic. So we hope that we've given you some basic information, kind of a general introduction that might help you as you are thinking about your own child, and if you're maybe recognizing some of these overexcitabilities with them. And and just kind of get your thoughts starting in that direction. So as far as kind of a general summary, when we are supporting our students, your children, and their overexcitabilities, is that we want to remember that the overexcitability is part of what draws out their giftedness. So we want to really try to focus and remember that positive side of the overexcitabilities, even though it's easy to get frustrated sometimes, and sometimes, you know, some of these things can be hard to deal with. If we kind of frame all of it within that positive lens, that this is part of what makes them who they are, and it's you know, there's positive sides of this too that can help us, and it can help them as well. It's also helpful to remember that these are innate dispositions. It's part of who your child is just naturally. So don't expect them to suppress these behaviors or these tendencies. Don't try to force them to change. In fact, doing so can be problematic and can actually have a negative impact on their development. So we want to instead nurture who they are and help them find ways that they can kind of express or release that overexcitability in safe and appropriate, more positive ways. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I mentioned, we just kind of skimmed the surface today. And so we wanted to share a couple of great resources for you. If you know, you kind of had your curiosity piqued and you're really interested and wanting to learn more. One website that you can check out is SENG. So SENG, S-E-N-G, stands for Supporting Emotional Needs of the Gifted. Their website is senggifted.org. I had to double check. So I just want to point out there is only one G in that website. So it's SEN, Supporting the Emotional Needs, and then the word gifted.org. It's a great website in general. It's a great place to read articles and find information. And there are some parent groups and things that can be really supportive and helpful through SENG as well. And then there's also a podcast called the neurodiversitypodcast.com. It is a great listen, a great resource in general. And there are some specific websites specifically about gifted and giftedness that you might find helpful as well. Next slide, please. And then, of course, as you have listened tonight, we are your team, and your students' teachers and school are your team to help as well. So if you've been listening tonight and you've kind of come up with some questions or some you know, concerns or even just ideas that you're thinking, gosh, you know, this, I really identify with this particular aspect of what was talked about tonight with my child. Or even just if it's not pertaining to tonight, you know, we're back from winter break, and sometimes we get to this point in the year and we're kind of ready to have some conversations about things that are going on instructionally and things like that with your students in their classes. So just wanted to offer a reminder tonight that your child's classroom teacher is always kind of your best and your first point of contact when anytime you are advocating for your child's needs or wanting to have those conversations with them. They, you know, are the one who in the school building usually who knows your child the best. They already have a relationship with you and with your child, so they are your first point of contact. Next slide, please. And then also just a reminder, depending on where your child is at in our school system, if they're in elementary or secondary, kind of who the additional people are that can be brought into the conversation. So of course, those of us who are here tonight, there are some additional TAG specialists who are not here with us tonight, listed here at each individual elementary school. And then at the secondary level, Shweta Miller is available for support and to help with some of those conversations. And of course, Melissa Barron, who's our Associate Director of Teaching and Learning at the district level. Specifically with some of the conversations around overexcitabilities and these more social and emotional needs for gifted students. In particular, sometimes there are additional people who might need to be brought into the conversation. school counselors in particular. Often these conversations are things that are really in their wheelhouse. And of course, there are other people in the building listed there as well who can all be brought in for some of those team conversations, depending on what it is that you're wondering about or thinking about or talking about. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. So just as a reminder that all of these presentations are recorded and posted on our TAG website, on the district website. The link to the webpage itself is a little bit funny. You're probably not going to remember that number 9498. But to get there, you just head to the regular ttsdschools.org. You'll click on the Teaching and Learning tab. And then, or I'm sorry, it's departments, the departments tab, and then Teaching and Learning under that. And then on the left-hand side menu, you will click on Services and then Tag. So if you just remember Teaching and Learning is probably—
Carrie, I'll just add a tip. You can also just Google TTSD Tag and you'll land right there.
You know what? I'm going to remember that for the next time I need to get to the webpage. TTSD Tag. Perfect. Okay. So that's even easier. Thank you, Shweta. So there is, of course, the recordings of all of these presentations. So if you want to go back and revisit, or maybe you joined us partway through and you want to go back and watch, or if you want to watch a past presentation, those are all there too, recorded for you. Both the English and the Spanish recordings are posted. And it's also just a great resource. We have lots of FAQs with information there and some different links to some outside resources and things like that. So if you haven't checked out the TAG website this year, we've revamped it as of this fall, and it's got a lot of resources there. Okay, next slide, please. So we are going to wrap up for tonight. As we mentioned, this is kind of a shorter evening for us tonight. I don't believe there are any unanswered questions in our Q&A here. But of course, if any of you do have questions that you did not bring up tonight, please do feel free, as always, to reach out to us. If there's anything that you are hoping for more information on, or questions that didn't get addressed tonight, we invite you to reach out to us that way. And then we hope that you will be able to join us. Our next community evening meeting like this is scheduled for Tuesday, March 8th. So a couple months from now. The topic is going to be supporting twice exceptional students. So twice exceptionality is students who are gifted and also have a special need or a disability of some sort. And that is something that is maybe more common than some people may realize. And it's really an interesting topic. So we are looking forward to sharing with you about that topic when we meet again in March. And then I believe that is it. Does anybody have anything else to add before we wrap up? Okay, so I think we are finished. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. I hope everyone has a wonderful, safe rest of the evening and week, and we will see you in March.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Of course, the baby's quiet now.